We have made rovers, and in this video we will be explaining how they work, how we did it, and the consequences of embarking on rover technology. We are space engineers. We push the limits of what is possible. And this time,
Alright, hold on. Stop with the cheesiness. Let's get right to the point. I'm Flop, that's Lightshaft, and Kirk's over there sitting in the corner.
Shut up.
alright. Gravity, rotors, and rocks. Let's go into how all of these things work in tandem to make amazingly fun vehicles. Let's start off with gravity transports, because they integrate all of the technologies into one. Gravity transport being a small ship linked to a large ship gravity generator, so that it can move it around by itself.
Basically making itself self-sufficient, since all you need for these rovers to work is gravity.
Exactly. And you could do some fantastic things if you have a gravity transport rover.
Like essentially making a spider vehicle that can drive on what you perceive to be the floor, and then the walls, and then the ceiling.
Yep.
Like some of the troubles that we had originally when we didn't have vehicles with their own gravity is they would try to go up ramps, but they would just get shoved back down because the gravity would be pushing them down. With the gravity rover, it doesn't matter if you're on the wall or the ceiling, you just keep going. Because gravity is always pushing you, the vehicle, in its down orientation.
And now to make this work, you can't just use small ship blocks. This is where the large ship blocks and gravity generators come in.
We found that a small ship built around a mounting point for a large ship gravity generator is kind of the way to go. You put a rock in the front and a rock in the back, and it keeps it all the way on the ground. Bob, you want to talk about the balancing issues we had with the rocks? Like sizes, weight differences?
Yeah, we had a little bit of issue with the weights of the rocks, because they actually do make a difference. So if you have a heavy rock in the front and a light rock in the back, then logically you would assume that the ship would be basically having its rear end and up in the air constantly, and especially when the ship is going over either rough terrain or is not connected to the ground completely with a lack of amount of gravity. So the weight of these rocks actually does make a big difference, and something you should consider. Try to get these rocks as close as possible to the same weight. They don't need to be exact, but at least within 100 kilograms of each other.
What were the weights we were primarily using?
We started out lighter at first with the concept vehicles, but as we made the larger, more finalized vehicles, including the gravity tug and the tank one, we generally stayed around the 400 to 350 kilogram area in terms of rocks.
Kirk, tell us about how the wheels rotating being larger or thicker, how does that work? There's no friction per se in Space Engineers, it's all collision.
When you have taller wheels, because the corner of the block is further away from the center of the rotor, it means it's moving faster. That in turn propels the vehicle forward faster, as well as upwards faster. Because of that, you need more gravity or a heavier rock to hold it down. Ideally, you'll have both.
Let's talk about traction and drifting these vehicles.
First point, these vehicles are amazing to drift. They're awesome. They do it in slow motion because the lack of necessary gravity to keep them fully weighted onto the ground. And these drift amazingly. We had a lot of fun testing them.
And traction, as we said earlier, is affected by both the wheel size, the wheel width, and the amount of gravity you have.
Gravity is a big factor here because you can do much tighter turns with a lot more gravity.
And you can do much longer drifts with less gravity.
Flop, we had some issues with burnouts. Did we ever fix that?
Burnout is generally caused by a lack of gravity, so the initial collision to get the vehicle moving usually sends it a bit higher than normal. But they're pretty cool for effect, and just it's a problem design wise, but we thought it was pretty funny watching those little rovers burn out in slow motion.
It all just seems to come down to, if you want the vehicle to have more traction, add bigger wheels and more weight.
More gravity. You have to be specific, because the weight of the ship doesn't affect anything. It's the weight of the rock, and then the bigger wheels don't affect anything. Well, they do affect things, but they're not the core of the thing, which is gravity and the weight of the
You're
rocks.
right, they push the ship upwards more.
Yeah, it's like the second phase. Okay, bottom line for traction in Space Engineers rovers is that it all comes down to gravity and the weight of the rock. The heavier the rock and the more gravity that's applied to the ship, the more traction you'll get.
So the way we came across this is we had a racing vehicle that looked more or less like a garbage truck, and we decided to go full garbage truck on it and give it wheels. Sure enough, the stupid thing was able to drive on the ground.
And then after that, we started thinking, will this actually work by using gravity instead of thrusters?
Right, at the time we had to actually use thrusters to keep this thing on the ground.
So going from this garbage truck design, we made a ship that was specifically designed to have wheels and to drive on the ground. At the time, I believe this ship still had thrusters, or did we get rid of those?
We excised most of them pretty quickly.
And we decided to give rocks a chance.
No, we realized that the vehicle could be held onto the ground through having rocks anchored to them.
After we had this initial design, we kind of broke off into our own groups. All three of us were working on different things. Flop, you want to tell us what you started working on?
I wanted to experiment with different wheel sizes and wheel shapes to see which ones would work best at propelling these rovers.
And what were your findings?
I found that the bigger the wheel and the longer the wheel extended out for the vehicle, it generally gave it more surface area to have traction on. So this would mean that it would have more control in terms of grip, as well as making the rovers go faster. The average speed for these things were about 5.2 meters per second.
And Kirk, when you broke off, what did you go off and do?
The first experimental vehicle I built, I added 6 wheels to it as opposed to the normal 4. And what I found was that adding more wheels to it had the same effect as making the original wheels wider. It gives you more traction.
So it ended up coming down to not surface area, but the amount of corners going around. When I broke off, I tried to give the vehicles their own gravity. So I built a gravity generator on a reactor and attached it to the back of one of these ships.
And how did that work for you?
It worked alright. It took some iterations and some modifications before I got it to where it wouldn't just fall backwards. This ship, with the gravity generator attached to it, ended up being it integrated all three of our designs into one thing. What happened to that design, Flo?
We recreated that scene from Armageddon.
It was our very own armadillo.
And then we flew it through a tunnel full of mines.
We gave it a turbo.
The turbo is very simple. It's called slapping on a large thruster on the back of your rover.
Ideally, the turbo will never be used during casual drive, only for extreme moments.
Right. It was kind of our own building ethics and theology that went into the turbo. Like, we wanted to have it, but we didn't want to abuse it. We didn't want to rely on it. We just wanted to...
It's just for fun. It's a fun feature. And we've all grown to like it. So I think it's going to be a thing in terms of our rover designs.
That's how the ship has grown into the current version that it's in. And we expect it to go much further. But during our trials and getting to this point, we had a lot of bugs come up, a lot of issues. Flop, what would you say was the most annoying of those issues?
Well, the game hates small rocks in small ships. Or just rocks in small ships. If there is a rock that is anchored to a small ship and affected by gravity, which is essentially the core of what makes these rovers, you can't actually exit game without the game just completely freezing up on you, and you essentially have to kill it with Task Manager. And this has not just been for one person. It's been all three of us have had this issue. It's recurring, and it's definitely an issue, and it's pretty damn annoying.
So it's the rocks and the ships.
Yeah, what we found is that if there's no rocks that are keeping small ships onto the ground through gravity, then we can actually leave the game without the game freezing on us.
That was certainly one thing. Kirk, tell us about when we're on Flop's server. What are the differences that you have?
When I attempt to drive one of those while connected to Flop's server, the wheels fly in every direction. It basically explodes.
Common symptoms of not passing astronaut preschool.
I flunked out of astronaut college.
Probably because astronaut preschool was a prerequisite.
And did you find, Kirk, that when your ship didn't just straight up explode, that you weren't able to go as fast?
I think that was just an issue for you. Whenever I'm connected to Flop's server, my ship would just straight up explode.
Okay, well, that makes it easy for you. For me, I wasn't able to get over 2 meters per second most of the time, and normally I'd be at the standard 5.2 or 4 if it was just a single player game.
Our theory is that all of these problems are caused by our internet connections, because out of the three of us, I have the worst connection. Lightshaft has the next best connection. Because of that, he can drive, but not at full speed. Flop almost always has the best connection, allowing him to actually drive correctly.
Not in Kirk's server, though.
Again, that brings up the internet problem.
Bottom line with internet connection and operating Rovers on a multiplayer server, the better connection you have with the host, and the better internet you have in general, the better results you'll see. At worst, when you get into a rover, it'll just start having a seizure and it's basically going to implode. And at best, you'll be able to drive it around without having random implosions. You might drive slower than the rover is actually capable of doing in let's say a single player game, but at least you'll be able to drive it.
Right, yeah, you should not expect to be able to drive these in multiplayer at the moment.
Yeah, not very functional multiplayer wise, but in single player, they're a lot of fun.
The bottom line for what we're saying with all these bugs, the main thing is the game crashing when you try to leave it. So you have to be saving every so often, or at least before you try to bail, because you really may lose your progress.
Yeah, it happened to us, and we were not very happy about it.
So if you do decide to embark on these rovers, be ready to deal with the circumstances and things that come with it.
We should say that if you remove all of the rocks from the ships, not just undock them, but actually remove them, you can exit the game normally.
But you gotta make sure you don't miss any rocks.
Not a single one.
Even though the rovers are currently quite buggy if you're trying to do them in multiplayer, or just doing them in single player as well because of the crashing issue, we still encourage you to try these rover designs out, or just try the concept of these rovers out, because they really are a lot of fun and it adds a new spin to Space Engineers.